Hi, everybody. My name is Trisha Friedman, and in this video, I want to talk to you about one of the new-ish features of large language models like ChatGPT. Some of them are doing this a little bit differently, but ChatGPT rolled this out a few weeks ago, and it has sparked some debate, some controversy, and some great conversation. Now, if you are old enough as I am, you might think of technology and memory and storage like a floppy disk. I sometimes miss floppy disks. I miss that little container on my desk that would store them. I miss labeling them. And I've been thinking a lot about how, in a way, the update to ChatGPT, where it has memory, or you have the option to have memory turned on, it just has me reminiscing on kind of the evolution of how we discuss memory and technology. To kick things off, if you're thinking, wait a second, how do I access this setting, turn it on or off, see what is optional? What you'll want to do is you can click on your icon for yourself as a user. That brings up the gear to go over and select settings. From settings, you want to select personalization. That's where you're going to find the options for memory. You can, quote, manage memories. You can turn things on or off. You can look at the memories that are there. You can delete them. Or you can say basically, like, I don't want my Chat GPT remembering anything that I have talked about. Now, there are some positive use cases. Again, technology is never neutral. It really does depend on your context, and you have to try things out. So I want to start with, basically, what are some of the reasons that you would want to have memory turned on? And I'm talking to you about this through the lens of having experimented over time with both having the memory turned on and having it turned off. And you might be thinking, like, Trisha, are you just like super bored? You're just spending time experimenting with some of the settings in ChatGPT. Now, I mean, yes, maybe I am just boring, I guess. I don't think I'm bored. I'm very curious about this technology. I'm very curious about the user interface and how it impacts the way that I think, the way that I learn, the way that I approach the work that I do. And if we're going to answer this question of should I have my memory turned on or off, I think we do have to experiment in order to come to that decision for ourselves. So on the surface, sure, it might sound like a small settings question, but I believe that actually it connects very deeply to how our human brains work and the kinds of biases that show up in our everyday decisions. So let me break down for you why I think there are potential times when you would want to have the memory turned on. If, like me, you work on projects over time, it's kind of a continuous project. You're going to be working on it for weeks. This might be something like planning curriculum. It could be tracking a dispute that you have with a company. Maybe you've purchased something recently and you're doing some research into the recourse you have as a consumer, or you were developing a plan. Memory means you don't have to keep repeating yourself. ChatGPT, or the large language model, is going to recall the thread of conversations that you've had. So just this past week, I was developing an app. I wanted to create something that was going to help me track and kind of nudge me towards making sure that I consume at least 30 different types of plants in a week. And so as I was using ChatGPT to help me with the code, to think about the design, because I had memory turned on when I was starting a new chat and I was doing any work related to that app, ChatGPT was able to recall the project. And that was a big win for efficiency. And of course, with that, again, there's going to be situations where there's some bias risk. Those of you who study bias, you've probably heard of anchoring bias. This means that you just get locked into earlier assumptions. Anchoring bias kind of means the first thing that you've heard, you believe that to be true, you believe it, and you're kind of anchored to it. Now, the app example that I gave you, that wasn't really a situation, I think, where anchoring bias was going to show up. So it just made sense for me to be using the technology where it was going to remember a lot of the decisions or a lot of the code debugging approaches that I had taken before. Now, there's also an argument to be made that if you have memory turned on, there can be some personalized scaffolding. It gets better at supporting you specifically. It will learn the style, the kinds of answers that you find helpful. And yet again, there's an argument to be made that, if it has learned how to appease you, that might create some confirmation bias, right? So again, I am not going to suggest to anyone that you have memory turned on or off. What I'm really encouraging you to do is think about your specific need and the specific thing that you are working on and question it. The other thing is, if I have memory turned on, what I noticed is there is some awareness across different conversations. So again, going back to my example about the app that I was designing, I had also been working on, I was getting some feedback on a framework for digital humanities that I had been writing about. And because it knew both of those things, it understood a little bit of the context of my work. And so ChatGPT would ask me every once in a while when I was working on the app if I wanted to create a digital humanities lesson or if I wanted prompts for a digital humanities course based on that app. It can be powerful. That can be useful because, to be honest, initially when working on the app, I didn't think about using it in that way. So again, I could argue that's a good thing. Now, we also, of course, want to talk about why there are absolutely plenty of reasons that you would want to have memory turned off. And as I've already said, there are some thinking biases that can come up if you are relying on the memory. I've noticed that when I have to restate a goal or I have to type out again an assumption, I'm going to be forced to reflect. I'm going to be forced maybe to think a little bit more. Now, I want to be crystal clear, though, that when we're thinking about data sovereignty and we're thinking about doing everything that we can to protect our data, probably you want to have memory turned off, right? I would suggest, and those of you who follow the news, you're familiar with loads of different applications, software, where your data is supposed to be safe. There's a hack, there's a leak. So the extent to which I could trust 100% that when I'm using a tool like ChatGPT, that my data is 100% safe, I can't trust that fully. I think I follow that news a little too closely to believe that. One thing I can do to be a little bit safer with my data is to turn that data off, right? Again, with anything I think that's a convenience, there's always some kind of risk that plays into it. So again, memory on, does it save me some time? Does it help me link some of the work in ways that maybe I wouldn't naturally or link that quickly? Sure. But memory turned off also, again, is great for data, for privacy. And I would argue it also maybe is more useful for having some fresh thinking. Now, I think this is a conversation that you want to keep coming back to, because if you do have your memory turned on, what I'd encourage you to do is think about that digital hygiene of when are you going to go in and check out what's in the memory, because you can delete certain aspects. So does this become a monthly habit, a bi-weekly habit? I think it's fascinating actually to look at that. But we have a one pager that has 5 questions that I think are really useful to be talking about with peers, most certainly with our students, but also with our family members. And I'll just, the link to all five questions is in the chat, but I also want to point to just one of them that I think is really great for some interdisciplinary learning. That's question 5. How do protections where I live compare with those elsewhere? So, how is it that different companies, that different LLMs have different data privacy standards in different parts of the world? We talk an awful lot about wanting to help students, wanting to help each other be able to advocate for the kind of technology, the kind of AI that we want. And I think a really great way of understanding that is by looking at how different regions are doing it differently. So again, I could imagine this being a really cool research project where you look into different regions, how they're handling data, how they're handling data from generative AI in different ways. Why are those laws in place? How do they maybe reflect some of the values? What different legal recourse do people have? It's a really great way, I think, to help students get deeply curious about the reality that there's not necessarily always a clear cut right or wrong, but there's lots of gray and there's lots of debate to have. And there's lots of ways that we can be learning from one another. All right. So hopefully that gets you a little bit excited to have that conversation about this notion of memory, where it can be helpful, where it might be harmful, and why ultimately you have to be very thoughtful about your use. Slow down, think about what you're doing, and think about what it is that you need from tools like ChatGPT. Thanks again.